Thank you everyone for registering and attending today. I think it's really great to see this kind of, again, continuing interest in data and metadata management from our entire market, from Canberra and from across Australia. So it's really good to see continuing growth in people who are coming to these events. So what we're talking about today is, oh, fantastic. Somebody said we could hear you. That's good. What we're going to be talking about today is a topic that's starting to grow in relevance, that people are starting to talk more and more about. And that topic's data democratization. And what we want to do today is talk through a couple of things around, well, first of all, what does it mean? Because it sounds like, you know, giving everybody your data, making sure everybody's got it, which can be quite daunting. Talking about why it's important. So why is data democratization starting to be a growing trend in data management, and how you can do it, like how you can take active steps to start, you know, democratizing your data and understanding what that means and the benefits for you and the rest of your organization. And then we haven't done this for a little while, but we're going to do like a couple of live demos. So there's going to be a really short presentation up front, and then lots of jumping into talking about how Aristotle is designed to assist with data democratization, because hopefully by the time we start pulling up the tool, everybody's going to kind of be on the same page and going, yes, data democratization is a you know, the answer to some of the challenges in our organization. So as I said, I want to start with what it isn't, because data democratization, when you say democratization, it means everybody gets a say, everybody is, you know, involved, everybody's participating. When you're talking about data, it sounds like throwing open the vault. You know, everybody can see the data and everybody can have access to it, and that's not what it is, right? So data democratization doesn't mean we treat our data any less secure than we already do. And it doesn't mean that we're giving it out to people who shouldn't already have access to it. So it's not about giving people, you know, raw access to tables and numbers and files and things like that. And it's not laying out the welcome mat. So this is really here to kind of make sure we break that stigma and say, you know, we understand, like everybody, I think, in data management understands how sensitive data can be, how secure data needs to be, and how we need to treat it as a very important asset. So data democratization doesn't mean that we throw out a welcome mat and let people start handling our data in potentially unsafe ways. So what is it then? Well, actually, the bank analogy kind of works for this one, because it's kind of like, it's a signpost, right? Data democratization isn't about giving everybody access to the data, it's about knowing where it is. So to use our bank analogy, we can treat money in the same way, in the sense that if I can find a signpost to an ATM and I have the right card and I have the right PIN number, I can withdraw money. Or, you know, if I find the signpost that points me in the direction of a bank, I can provide them with the right evidence and I can get access to, you know, the funds in my account. It's not throwing open the vault. What data democratization is it's letting people know, it's posting signposts across the organization so that everybody understands what data exists, because that's the key here, is like, we get value out of our bank and we get value out of our money by knowing there's ATMs, you know, around us. You know, I can look up the locations of, you know, where I can go to withdraw money. I can look up the locations of where I can go to talk to somebody, you know, at my bank. I can even know where the bank vault is. You know, I know that my local bank has a big vault. You see it behind the teller, but I don't have access to it. I don't have the credentials to go in. So what it's about is it's about signposting across our organization so that everybody knows what data is there. And the other key thing is it's about helping communicate it in language they understand. So again, I really like this picture. I grabbed this picture off like a little stock photo site. And what I can see here is like, there's an ATM, it's straight ahead. And if I was in a country where I didn't speak the language, I could probably, you know, from the pictograph, I can see that it's like a machine, and I know that it's a 2-minute walk. So there's a lot of information around that in terms that I understand that help me know where to go for the ATM. Data democratization is very, very similar in the sense that we want to use, it's not just about telling people that a table exists, it's about telling them what the data asset is and why it has corporate importance. Like, why is this data important, you know? And that's the kind of thing that can't be captured in a database. It can't be captured in, you know, a spreadsheet. You know, what we're talking about there is, you know, very traditional metadata information that says, you know, why is this data important for us across the organization? So when you start talking to people about this, because again, this is a very growing trend, it's something that's where we're seeing talked about quite a lot online. When they ask about data democratization and they say, does that mean I'm going to give everything away? Tell them to think signposts, not bank vaults. It's about giving people the access and the information they need, or sorry, it's about giving people the information they need to find the right access, and treating it like a signpost rather than an open doormat. Why is this important? Well, I mean, that's quite simple. So what we're going to do is we've got this flow, and I think this flow really highlights the challenges that we see in traditional kind of data access in a lot of organizations. So we have this idea of like an internal or an external stakeholder who needs access to data, and this is growing in importance. Like, people who need access to data often need it in a hurry. They need to produce a particular briefing. They need to produce a particular report. They might need to respond to, you know, a request for information from, you know, from a minister, or it might be coming from, you know, from an important shareholder or an important stakeholder that's saying, you know, I need this data. And to be able to find this information, there's often a lot of like messy steps that we go through. So our stakeholders have to go to websites, they have to trawl through these word data dictionaries and try and interpret the meanings from that. Those may not be linked together, so you may need to find multiple like different sources and go, you know, is this the same information? Can I compare it from one source to the next? And then getting access to it is, again, often a manual process where you email data custodians and hope that it's going to the right mailbox, and that mailbox is monitored, and then that person has the right information. So your request may bounce around like between 2 or 3 different people before you can actually find the data. Once you've got the data, it may actually not be the right information. Like, it may be out of date, it may be from the wrong jurisdiction, or it may not match what you were expecting. So the challenge here is, like, we've got this need for data. There's this growing need to know what data is available. So even before we hit that bottom right-hand tin can in the bottom, we want to know that, you know, we're asking the right questions. And this is where Aristotle comes into play. Like, obviously, we're you know, this is an Aristotle-run webinar, so we're going to put ourselves right smack bang in the center and say, well, you know, the reason that we've developed the Aristotle Metadata Registry is specifically to solve this kind of problem. So what we're looking at here is making sure that everybody in the organization, you know, whether it's a department or an agency or a you know, a private sector company, like, everybody in the organization knows where they can go to find information and interpret that data correctly. So this means our business areas know where to go to search for data, our data quality managers know where to go to look for, you know, and update the data, and people who are producing, you know, our integrations or our database administrators can go to a single source of truth. And then, like, our executives, I think, again, we're starting to see a big need for chief data officers in a lot of organizations, and they need to know that quality guidelines are in place, that, you know, the quantity and quality of data is improving over time, and that people are you know, reasonably accessing it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through 2 really quick user stories that talk about what Aristotle is designed to do and how it assists with this idea of making sure that everybody in the organization understands data. Once we've done that, then we're going to jump in and we're going to do a couple of like live demos of the tool for about, like, you know, 20 minutes, looking at different ways we can use Aristotle to make this data more accessible to users, you know, across our organizations more broadly. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to look at these 2 quick user stories. So one of these is coming from our external stakeholders or our internal stakeholders, or people in our you know, organizations and departments who need to know, you know, just what is it? Like, how do I find what data is available? You know, what are the search capabilities that I can use in plain text using, you know, business English to find the data that's available and make sure that I'm requesting the right things. The other thing that we're going to look at as well is focusing on the data quality aspect. So, making sure that when users start to populate this, because again, we want to get everybody across the organization involved, not only in finding data, but also creating new records. And once they begin, creating new records and documenting our data assets, is that of high quality? Is it meeting the needs of the organization? So what we're going to do there is we're going to look through a little bit of how Aristotle supports data governance and that business and data stewardship and business and data management kind of interaction, so that we can collaboratively build this development so that everybody's getting involved in this. So making sure that, again, everybody's seeing the right information at the right times. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump back. So I'm going to switch my screen over. There we go. Oh, that's not good. Let's get a little bit of my green screen. Cool. That should be better. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my demo organization. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to my dashboard and show you what an Aristotle looks like. So what I've done here is I've already logged in. So I've logged into my Aristotle, and there's a lot of content here. And what I'll show you afterwards is I'm going to show you what it looks like for a new user coming to this as well, so that they can understand, how they can get involved. But we're going to go through a few steps before we get there. But the idea is once a user's logged in, they see a system that looks a little like, it looks exactly like this. It doesn't look a little bit like this. It looks exactly like this. And this is designed to put all the information around what activities have gone on through the data system, through the data metadata registry in front of the user, so they know what work needs to be done. Again, the idea that we're trying to focus on here is that people need to know about information that's flowing through the system, and they need to be aware of what other people are doing. Data democratization doesn't mean everybody works in isolation. We really want to focus on that collaboration. Are groups working together to effectively document this data? Because we all move through roles, we all move through different parts of the organization as we progress through our careers. So knowing that there are other people involved in the stewardship of this data becomes really important for the long-term management and quality control of our data registries. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up something that's I've run through before myself, so I have to restart it, but is a really recent addition to the Aristotle Metadata Registry, and that's these tours that we're starting to introduce across the entire organization to help people understand how they can use this properly. So we've started to add into a lot of pages across the Aristotle Metadata Registry, little tours that drive users through the site. The idea here is again at some of our clients, we've seen up to like 300-400 users across an organization, all using the same system to document data. What that means is that we need to make sure that all of those users are onboarded effectively and in a semi-automated fashion. Like we've still got we have all of our training online, but we want to make sure that first interaction, that first touch point with the registry helps them understand what they need to do. And the idea is, I'm not going to run through all of these because many of you have probably already seen these already if you're already a user of Aristotle. But the idea is we want to drive users through the site and help them understand what's available. So what this is doing is this is helping us show users what's across the system and what certain things mean. These tours are designed to be really short, and it's designed to capture their attention at that first point of contact so that they understand what their role in the data governance process is. The idea is that this reduces the burden on the data stewardship areas to onboard and train people, and uses the tool to do it for them. So that's our first really cool component there, is looking at ways that users can do it. If you're already a user of Aristotle and haven't seen these, what we have done is we've also added a help page specifically for them, which I'll bring up now. If you just search tours in our help, oh, don't make me a liar. Oh no, we do have a help page for these. Said, hoping that everything is fine. There we go. So we have a help page designed for these. So if you go to help, And if you just scroll down to tours, take a tour of the features, you'll see a list of all of the active tours in the site. And you'll also see, you would have seen a second ago, a little pop-up that tells me what's happening there. Clicking on any one of these will show you all the tours available in the system, and we might run through a couple of these as we progress through. Actually, we'll do one of those right now because we want to jump to creation. So what we've jumped to here is our sandbox. So the sandbox is designed to be a private area where users can control their own content. Again, one of the big aspects of data democratization is making sure everybody's able to use the tool, and part of that means using the tool safely. If everything's on display, if everybody can see what you're doing, you start to become very conservative and a little bit shy. So the sandbox is designed to be an area where people can test and experiment with what they do in the system before they start adding it to groups and publishing it for further consumption. The idea here is, again, we want to encourage people to use the tool to self-train, and we'll see a little bit more of that in a second. But the idea is our sandbox is there to help us understand that we have private content that's only visible to us. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start, as you can see, I've already started creating some test content in this registry, and I'm going to start creating a little bit more. What we're going to focus on for this talk is we're going to focus on data asset management. So we're going to create some data sets, and we're going to do a little bit of data lineage work to help link those together, to help explain why, again, data lineage becomes an activity that we want people to do so that they can document what they've done to transform data, because often this is a little bit lost during the process, especially when it's done in an automated fashion. So content creation is done, you know what, I'm going to cheat and use the tour. Content creation, I actually like these now. Content creation is done in a way that we basically drive people through here to help them pick the right content. We've got a number of different ways that users can do this. And again, this is designed to help data stewards encourage people to create content through the system. So we've got a number of metadata wizards that enable a user to create and link related metadata like items together. We have a number of upload formats that we can use to bulk import content. We might look at that later on during the presentation if we can get a chance. And then lastly, we have the ability to create records directly. And this is where I'm going to jump out. So the ability for us to create records directly enables us to pick any of the different metadata types that we've built into Aristotle, that we've taken from the relevant standards to really improve standardization of content. And then they can create those directly and save them into their sandbox. What we're going to do is we're going to basically start creating a few data sets and link those together. And to do that, I just scroll down to my data set registration and management. Also, I should probably be monitoring the Q&A. Have there been any Q&A yet? If there are Q&A that come through, I'll periodically monitor as well. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a data set. And all I need to do is just click create. One of the really great things that I'm going to show here as well is we've added in a new editor, and I've loaded up the new editor by default. And what this is designed to do is it's designed to help capture similar content at creation. So it's basically a complete rewrite of our old editor, and it's much more interactive. And what that means is if I start adding in, try and search for some content that exists. Give me a second. I'm going to find something that exists because I think this is pretty neat. So I'm going to browse, and one of the good things about data democratization is being able to browse for content. So patient experience, there we go. I'm going to start creating patient experience. So what you can see here is the tool's already identified potential duplicates that already exist in the system. So one thing that we want to do is, because we're building a collaborative system that has multiple users in it, we want to make sure that users aren't accidentally recreating content. And if they do start to travel down that path, we have this ability to prompt them to look at the appropriate things. This is a really good way for us to onboard users to help them find related information if they haven't already gone through the search process. What I am going to do though is I am going to drop this away because I think I know what I'm doing. I'm going to create a new item. raw database tables. So I'm going to create a new piece of content in here, and I'll have to lean forward a bit for this one. I'm going to create a new data set. I'm going to add this in there, and I'll call it my 2020 patient experience database. And what this database is it's a database of self-reported survey data that describes how users felt about a recent stay in a hospital. Again, the really big thing to highlight here is plain text. So unlike other data systems, really good data systems, but unlike other data systems that focus on tables and columns, we really want to focus on what this information means, because knowing what the data means and why it's been collected has a little bit different importance to knowing what the structure of the table is. The structure of tables, we can interrogate that from our databases and from our spreadsheets. What we want to be doing as a big focus of our data democratization aspects is really encouraging people to talk about why their data is important. Because if we can get them to talk about why their data is important, we get big, long paragraphs of text. And that means once we start publishing this, people can find it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that and save it, and that's it. Like, that's really the crux of the problem. Is we've now started to expand out that database. We've now started to expand out that data asset register, so that if people were searching for patient experience, they're going to start to see the right results. And to show what I mean about that is, if I go for patient results, what I'll see is I'll start to see a bunch of independent data. So now I'm starting to see a bunch of related data that tells me that there's a lot of data about this across my organization. So I know what's important and I can start to see it. Now, the reason I have permission to see it is because I've created a lot of this content. But if somebody was to come to this from outside the organization or from a different area in my department, they may not have the right permission. So what we can do is we've started creating this content. What we're going to do is we're now going to look at data lineage and start linking some of this together, because as you can see, we're starting to get a little bit of longitudinal information happening here. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to my 2020 patient experience database. And I'm going to edit it again. And the reason this is a manual process is because data lineage is a manual process. Like an individual in the organization grabs 2 or 3 data sets and tries to link them together. So what we want to do is we want to be able to understand why and how that was done. So what I can say is I'm going to grab my components. And we have this ability for us to record data provenance. So data provenance is another term that's used for this idea of where data has flowed across time. And I'm going to say that I found there we go, right up at the top. My 2019 data patient experience data set. So it's not a new version, I've actually transformed it. So I want to be able to record here that the 2020 patient experience data set, patient data set, just go short, incorporates previous years to provide a longitudinal snapshot of hospital experience data. Relatively few spelling mistakes in that one, which I'm pleased with. So what I can do now is I can now save this. And I can say, oh, I did that last year. Go back January 1st. I can now save those changes. And now what I start to see is, again, I'm starting to build up this record to know where it's come from. So it's not merely just a new version of the same data set. What we're saying is we've taken last year's and we've added additional content to it. We've transformed it in a particular way. And while, again, we want to know, what was the particular code, or, what computer programming was done to perform that transformation, the bit that isn't always captured is why. why did we bring these two data sources together? So what we can say is that this 2020 patient experience database was produced from other data sources. And again, we start to see this hierarchy and this linkage build up across the organization. What I'm going to do there is I might check for a quick Q&A. And I'm going to run through one last, I think, really important aspect of this data democratization, and then we'll start looking. We'll pause for Q&A, and then we'll have a look at data governance. So what we're going to do there is we're going to now start looking at how I can interact with this data when I can't edit it. So what we've seen so far is, content that I can change, content that I have created that I own. What I want to start looking at now is ways to interact with it that don't necessarily mean creating it. So what I can do is I can start opening issues. So we've added this capability through the platform for us to add issues around this data, so that, or around these metadata records, so that we can document potential problems with the data. The idea is that no record is perfect on our first go, and especially in large-scale data dictionaries, we want to know that all of these issues are tracked correctly, and having them tracked alongside the metadata means that users can see these issues and follow the life cycle of them appropriately. So what I can do in here is I can go no link to this source for this year's data. So what I've done here is I'm going to open an issue and go, we haven't explained where the 2020 data has come from. In our example, we said, we grabbed last year's data and we did some transformation, but we don't know the origin of the updated data because we haven't got any additional tables or anything in there. So what I can do is I can create an issue, and now anybody who has access to edit this content will have received a notification and will know that there's a potential problem or a potential question that is to be asked about this data. So it's really about driving that collaboration through the system, and those data users can come back and they can comment, they can close the issue, they can track the life cycle of this potential problem. Necessarily, they could potentially tag it and make sure that people know what to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to my item, and I'm going to pause here for a round of questions and see if there's any feedback from here. So we'll pause for questions before we move on to the next part, and I can have a quick sip of my cup of tea. But are there any questions that we've got so far? Here we go. We've got a question from, hang on, Data Signpost, thank you. How does the related content work? Okay, so Stan is asking a couple of questions about the related content at the bottom. What we're looking at here is, again, at the bottom of every page, we include a list of, or a link, we include a list of potential relationships that these particular data sets can exist in. So Stan's noticed something really interesting, that we do actually enable the tracking of performance indicators and linking data sets to those performance indicators to track data across time and report against potential metrics. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing here that we haven't linked this data set to anything, but if there were any links back to indicators across the registry, this would be where they would show up. So that's what that is there, Stan. So hopefully that's answered the question. But the idea is there that we can add any rules we want in. So the indicators and the data element derivations become the rules about how we transform this data. And we're looking at adding those into the linkages as well, so that we can see if there's any standard transformations happening across the system, and what the impact of those is across time. So is that a good answer for the question there, Stan? How do I find data like patient source data? So I think, so we've got a question here. How do I find data like patient in the example data set? So the key thing here is what we can do there is, one of the things that we can do through the platform is we can add access information. So this is diving really deep in, so thank you for this question. But the idea is there we can add in information about rights and access URLs as well. So what I'm going to do here is I can add in a landing page for the data. So this might be the name of the database itself. I've got a proper field for that. So the landing page might be a link to where that data source lives within the organization. So this might be a long database scheme that talks about patient data. So this would be a way for us to describe where that data is without necessarily getting access to it. So the idea is once I've saved this in, and I might add some rights information as well, and go data only available to members of the hospital performance metrics. So, and I'll show why this is important in a second, is once I've saved that, oops. Let's just remove that one entirely, and I will investigate that after the call. There we go. So once I've saved this, we're still building up our record here, and we can say who this data is available to and who they need to kind of contact to access it. So the idea is Aristotle isn't necessarily the direct access platform. We've got other tools like data repositories that would hold our data, or our data warehouses, or our data lakes. What Aristotle is Aristotle becomes the signposting that tells people what data is out there across the entire data environment, so people know what to look for. So if I was to come to this page, again, what I can see here is I can see that the data exists, and I can see that, I may not currently have access to it. So if I'm not a part of that specific team, I may not have immediate access to it, but I know who to talk to. So there might be a really strong ministerial requirement, or a legal requirement that I have to get access to this data. And it tells me that if I talk to that team, they're the ones who will be able to facilitate the direct access to what may be a very highly sensitive data source. So again, it's not about directly touching where that data lives. It's about knowing who to talk to and knowing what the right questions to ask are. So hopefully, is that a good answer for that question? Data elements. Oh, cool. So I've got two here, one about data elements in the data set and one about data linkages. What I'm going to do to answer that is I'm going to go to an example I prepared earlier, I think. There we go. So what we can see here is I've opened up so somebody asked a question about linking data elements back to data sets. The way that we do that is there's kind of two layers that these standards have introduced to describe a data set, which is a large scale collection of information across the organization. So a big blob of stuff, and a distribution, which is the way that they've phrased an individual file or an individual sheet. And it's the individual sheets that might have information that we can access at a data element level. So this is where our columns are. This is where our fields are in our database. So again, what we can see here is in this really thoroughly put together example, we can again start to see more information about the 2019 example, and we can see that it's been broken down by 3 different areas. So we've got a 2019 for New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. So each one of these areas have reported back independently, and may have reported back as their own file or as their own table in the database. We can also see the link back to the future one as well, which is really good. So again, we're building up lots of information there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into this individual file, and this is where we can start adding those data elements in. So the idea is I'm not going to step through a full example of this. We might do one after we've run through our registration examples. But the idea here is that what I can do is, again, so I've got a nice name and a definition on our home page. I can jump to my components, and I can scroll down and I can see that this is where I can start adding in information about our new data elements. So I'm going to find a data element for age. And go patient age. There we go. There's a nice example in our Aristotle.cloud. And I'm going to find that example and I'm going to go patient age. What this effectively allows me to do is it allows me to create a record that's given me the ability to link between a column in the database and an individual data element, and then provide a definition for that as well. So this one's probably not a great example, but I hadn't prepped one ahead of time, so sorry about that. But we could certainly find an example, another example that would fill that in there. So that's how we link our data elements. What I might do. Okay, so I've got a quick question, and then I'm going to jump back to Stan's. So yes, Ron, we've seen, so Ron's asked a question about visual representations around this data lineage. Yes, that is a really huge question that people have asked, and we've started to prep that for our roadmap for next year. So something that many of you may be aware of is we run an annual roadmap that helps us figure out what we're going to be doing for the next 12 months. One of the big activities is putting more graphics and more visual representations of the metadata through the system. So yeah, so there's definitely plans for us to be adding that in the near future as well. Performance measures. So I'm going to jump back to Stan's question here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump all the way back to my dashboard. So Stan has asked a really interesting question about the creation and linkages between data sets and performance indicators in the Q&A. So what that means is basically understanding how we can create a performance measurement, add the metadata and add the sources for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in, I had not expected this, so this is going to be a really fun example. I love it when we go off script. So Aristotle has a big component around performance indicator management. So the idea here again is we're not talking about data and we're not talking about tables. We're talking about specific ways that we use data to calculate specific metrics of importance across the organization. What we've got here is there's three major components to this. There's our indicator, which is that it's a way of defining how we use data to calculate a specific number that is tracked against a metric. So, are people feeling happier or safer in Australia, and broken down by certain categories. Our outcome areas are designed to be a way to aggregate a number of indicators by what we can term as a very hard to measure idea. So I guess one way to kind of break that down would be an outcome area would be things like, are people feeling happier? But it's hard to track that, right? I can't ask you, are you feeling happier? Because there's a lot of aspects that go into that. Our indicators are ways that we can kind of attach more measurable, kind of discrete challenges against those outcomes. So ways that we might feel happier are, is there a park within 5 kilometers of your house? That's probably a really good, way for us to kind of measure your ability to get out and do live exercise. It might contribute to your happiness. Are you able to spend time with loved ones? These are the questions that we can ask that are very measurable, that all contribute back to that outcome area. And a framework is how we group a number of outcomes to a larger, policy kind of framework. So we might have a framework that captures the ideas of, are people feeling happier? Are they safer? Are their jobs more secure? So again, very high level statements about what we as an organization, a department, or as even a company might want to achieve. So the framework is designed to be a way for us to bring all of that together. What we're going to do is we're going to jump in and we'll just do an indicator for now. And we just do that same way as we do with everything else. We're going to record, we just click the create button and we can start building one out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build, so patient experience, I always have to come up with these on the fly, is, so we've collected a whole bunch of patient experience data. Length of time between hospital visits. This might be a really good way for us to, measure how often somebody is attending hospital. It's a pretty good leading indicator for their general experience with the health sector. So if you have to go to hospital a lot, it's probably influencing how happy you are when you go, which is probably not a lot, to be honest. Like, you're having to go to hospital a lot, so you're probably not feeling well, you're not having a great time. And we want to be able to track that. Like, it's an important part of measuring general, happiness and, performance of the hospital sector. So, we can put some of that in here. A leading indicator for how happy people feel. What we can then do is we can attach specific outcome areas. We can describe how that's calculated. We can describe how it's computed as well. So what do we do? So we can have the calculation and then the description of what that means. So we might say, we take all of the columns in the data, and add them up. Two very important things around our, the idea of an indicator is this idea of a numerator and a denominator. Oh, that was bad. Denominator, a numerator and a denominator. So this is helping us understand performance over a specific population. So what we might be looking at here is number of visits across total number of people. So we go, the denominator is total number of hospital attendees. There we go. And the numerator might be total number of visits. So what we can see here is, number of visits, basically number of visits per person who goes to hospital. If this is tracking quite high, it means there's quite a large number of people who are having to revisit hospital in a 12-month period. There we go. There you go. So again, we're starting to build up a really nice idea of what this metric means without actually having touched any data at all. The last thing that I'm going to do is, again, one that's really important for these indicators that we see on dashboards a lot is the way for us to break this down. So we might want to understand how an indicator not only is built up, but the accurate ways that we can report on it. So we might report this data and we go, this indicator available by age group and by state. So what that tells us is we might be interested in tracking the performance of children under 18 years old in New South Wales and seeing, how often those people in that population are having to attend hospital. So it's a really good way for us to understand, again, what this indicator is without having to touch the data. But now we're going to touch the data. So we're going to add this in. So somebody was asking about how I attach specific things in. And what I can do is I can attach a particular data set in and I can go, I'm going to add in my my 2019 National Patient Experience data set as a data source of interest for the numerator of this data. I might also add it in, we might be calculating it here as well. Oops. So 2019 patient experience data set, there we go. So we're using it as both an entry point to the numerator and the denominator for this data source. And once I create that, again, I see this really good summary that tells me up front, I can see, and again, this is why that this data democratization is important, is what my indicator is, total number of visits by total number of hospital attendees, actually doesn't match my name. So, again, the really big rationale for this is being able to understand and make sure the documentation matches between what we've called these things, how we've calculated them, and what the data sources actually are. So what I can do is just quickly add that up. edit that up and go hospital visits per attendee 2019. So now we've got a really nice indicator. I've saved that. And again, if I was to go back to my 2019 kind of collection, so I can see here and I can go, well, where is this data actually used across the organization? When I scroll down, now we start to see this related content is starting to fill up, and I can see, well, it's used as a numerator in an indicator, and it's actually being used as a way for us to calculate hospital visits. One thing that we are doing is we are, again, on the roadmap for next year, looking at doing a little bit of a refresh around this to make it a little bit more dynamic so people don't have to jump back and forth between pages. But the idea is we're starting to build up that big collection of data behind the scenes. So what I'm going to do is jump back to the Q&A. And no more Q&A has come through, which is good, which leaves me a few more minutes to run through some things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to my 2020 patient experience. And I'm going to start saying I'm pretty happy with it. You know, we've done some work on it. We've made sure that it's looking up to scratch. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start putting it forward for review by people across my organization. So I'm going to open a review. And the idea here is, again, we want to make it easy for people to start creating content and then involve the data stewards as necessary. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to please update this data source. Please, the 2020 data is ready for review and release. I'm not going to attach a team, but this is where I could. If I wanted to attach a particular team, I could do it there. And I want it to go to, we've got an example data stewards group, so I'll bug somebody in my team, and they're probably going to get notified later this afternoon that this will, in a few minutes, this is going through. But we'll flag them, and we'll also say that I want this reviewed by the end of next week. So we're starting to build up that workflow process in the tool to say, you know, I want this published and it's ready to be standardized. And we'll look at what that means in a second. And then lastly, what I want it reviewed by next week, but I want this to be listed as a standard because it's gone through it's going to be going through all the right review processes. And we'll say 1st of November, 1st of December. And then I'm just going to create my review. I won't run through this in a second because we haven't attached anything to this data source. And I'll create my review. And I've started to see some really cool things happening through the system. So what I can see here is, first of all, I've now started to flag in this data research group and said, I need you to review this because it's important. Right, I need you to be involved. So this is where that democratization comes into play. Is we're now starting to bring everybody across the organization together to start bringing them to have this conversation in one place. The first thing that this system has done is it's noticed that there's nobody who's actually going to take control of this data if I move on. So if I was no longer responsible for this data and there was no stewardship organization, there'd be no one to manage this data. And that's a problem that we want to resolve here is, again, a lot of the challenges that we see is there'll be one person in the organization who's responsible for a particular data source. And there's no way for us to build in that contingency planning. What happens when that person moves on? Do we have this adequately documented? This forces us to say who is going to own this data, not who's going to endorse it, but who's going to be responsible for owning and controlling it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a stewardship organization right now, and I'm going to move this into my demo organization. By moving it there, everybody, the administrators of that organization are able to control it. So now I've handed over a little bit of control and a little bit of visibility to the people in that organization because I'm now entrusting them and saying, I'm going to make sure that this data is updated, but under the guidance of a particular organization. What I will quickly jump back and do is I will go to my items tab And I'll jump to that item, and you'll now see we've actually got that listed here as well. So somebody who's come to the site, who's searching for data across the organization, now sees who's responsible for controlling this, who's responsible for keeping it up to date and making sure it's all managed. The other thing that I can do from here is we can start to see this build up of a conversation and this ability to endorse metadata, which I'm not going to do today. But the other thing that we can do is, as part of the review, we can also track potential issues against all of the items. So for anybody who's taking notes, you may have remembered earlier on in this presentation, we did like a little issue here, and we flagged that there was a potential problem with this item. And as part of that review, all of those issues have been brought together so they can all be addressed in one place. So every item that's a part of the review, all of the issues come into one area so that everything can be controlled from here. So the idea is that once we open this item up, we can keep adding issues, and they keep being added to the review as well, so that we know exactly what work needs to be done to prepare this for publication. The way that we do that is through this endorsement process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my AXA Research Committee, and I'm going to make some changes because this is actually overdue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what a registration authority does and what it looks like. So what a registration authority is it's an organisation responsible for endorsing content for different use, right? So we've set one up here because we publish a lot of examples ourselves in Aristotle Metadata. And what we haven't done is we haven't actually added the right metadata. So I'm going to add some information in here and say we mostly use recorded to push this out. And what this means is that the chief, the lead metadata architecture group has agreed, has reviewed all appropriate fields and has endorsed the data as a suitable example for publication. Right. So what that does is it tells me that by being recorded, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good piece of metadata. It means it's a good example. So somebody who's coming to this registration authority to understand what this all means, they'll see that recorded means that it's been approved as an example, right? So when we publish our examples out, we want people to see them, and sometimes we publish incomplete examples to help people understand why all of the fields are mandatory. So we've captured recorded as a way for us to publish content that may not necessarily meet our own guidelines, because we want people to see what different examples will look like. And we've now recorded that. Like, that's now available, so somebody who's looking at this understands who's endorsed it and why it's been endorsed, and also what the audience is. So you can see there's a couple of groups ahead of time that we can use these states to internally vet this content before it goes out, which is how we do it. And then once it hits recorded, it becomes published and available for everybody to see. What I'm going to do is, as a member of this registration authority, I can also see all of my test reviews and all of my open reviews, and I'm going to open my review back up, and this is where I could start endorsing this content. So if I was to click this button, well, I'll click this button, but I want to approve it. I can use this to grab all the content from that data set and endorse it in one group. So what it'll do is it'll pick up the required statuses. So I'm going to go, yes, I want to close this review. Ready for publication. You know what, I'm just gonna do it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make one small change here, because as we saw, we shouldn't be using standard. So as a good steward, I'm gonna drop that down to recorded, and I'm gonna update the details. I'm gonna jump to the approval section, and I'm going to approve this as recorded. So we've gone through all the steps, we've done everything we need to, and we go, this data set was endorsed during the October webinar. And I'm going to close the review. What I can do then is I can see a review of everything that's about to happen in a single table. So what I can see here is I've got a data set that hasn't been endorsed and I'm about to endorse it. So as of December 1st, oh no, I'm going to have this problem again. Let me go back. I'm going to make one change because we don't want to future date something. We want to show what it looks like right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change that registration date to be yesterday so we don't have the future date problem. One of the advantages of Aristotle is we can basically set things to be endorsed at a future date, which doesn't change its state today. The problem is sometimes I've done that in these live recordings and we don't have 20 days to wait on the webinar for it to be updated. So if I update the review details one last time, and as you can see, it's an iterative process. This is a really big iterative process that we're doing here that you'd be doing in your own organizations to review this content. So last but not least, endorsed at the October webinar. By Sam, without forwarding, without metadata architecture group review. So I've explained why this is happening. Right? I've explained why it's happening because I think it's important to show what this looks like in real time. So it's been endorsed by me, and that'll be attached to it as well. I'm going to close this review, and last but not least, again, I can do my review. The registration date will be yesterday, so we don't have to worry about waiting for that endorsement to be processed, and I'm going to apply this. What we'll see then is the status, sorry, this review is now closed. Everything's been registered as recorded, and I can see that it's been approved. So everything's all hunky-dory. So there's a lot of feedback for both the person who's opened the review, the person who's managing it, to kind of control that conversation back and forth. What it also means is if I open up my item, and again, I'm aware that we're really close to time, is if I was to open up this item, I can see that endorsement process, and I can see that it's been captured as recorded. And the other really good thing that I'll do right now is I'm going to log out actually, and I'm going to search for that item. Away. Patient experience data. And as you'll see, the list of things that I can see is actually reduced because I'm no longer logged in. I don't have all of the crazy permissions that I had previously. All I can see is things which have been made public. And if I click it, I can start to see again a review of like a listing of what's happened. And I believe this one has been published separately. Yeah, so what we've seen here is this one's been published instead of endorsed. So last year when we did this example, we published it. But this one, as you can see, it's been endorsed by somebody. So we start to see why things are visible. So we can start to see a little bit of information about what's happening behind the scenes. The other thing that we can see in our 2019 example is we don't actually get that. Well, we do get that listing. That's not good. There we go. So even though we can see that there's a number of things that it's linked to, I don't have permission to actually open any of them because they were only stored in my sandbox when I was logged in. So as a logged out user, I don't have any of those controls. So the idea is, again, a lot of publication controls about how people can access this data. And I think that's pretty much it. That was all the things that I wanted to cover today on that data democratization topic. And I think we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to conversation again. I think there was a couple of Q&A that came through. So if there's any more questions that people have around creation or endorsement, please fire them through. I don't think I can unmute anybody when we do it as a live stream like this. But if you've got any more questions, type them through and we can probably run through a few more examples for a few more minutes. But if no Q&A comes through in like the next 2 minutes, we'll sign off and we'll wrap this up and put the recording online and people can review it afterwards. So any Q&A? Nope. Okie dokie. I'm going to give it 30 more seconds. What I will do is I'll just switch back to my slides. So I'll switch back to my slides and I'll hop on my last one. What I'm going to do is I'll leave this up as my thank you slide because we've got a couple of really good quotes that we got recently from some people who are using Aristotle. I've got to find my teams. There we go. So switch to that one. Nope. Okay, it's not switching across. That's okay. So what I'll do. Ooh, that's my face all blue. What's going on there? So there's been no questions for a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause there and we're going to end there and thank everybody for their time and thank everybody for watching. Really appreciate everything that everybody's done to come along and provide their feedback today. I don't know why I'm turning green, so I'm just going to switch that off. Not sure what's going on. I'll just, yeah, so we'll leave the recording there. Thanks everybody for attending and registering. We'll be sending out a recording of this after the fact. I'll stop focusing on the fact that it looks like half of my face is disappearing into the background. And yeah, if there's any follow-up questions, please send them through or send them through to our community at community.aristotlemetadata.com. If there's any questions, email us at hello@aristotlemetadata.com. And if you'd like any further information, just reach out and we'll provide it to you as quickly as we can. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for asking the questions and interacting throughout the entire presentation. Have a good afternoon.